What is up, Ravens flock? Huge shout out for your support for the 410 Sports Talk. James and Glenn are the best in the business. They're killing it right now. They love talking Raven talk. Make sure you go subscribe to their channel. Let's go Ravens. Big trust.
Welcome in everyone to another episode of 410 Sports Talk. I'm Glenn Martin here with my co-host James Haskell. In this episode, we're going to discuss what should Ravens fan, as Ravens fans, what did we learn from watching the Super Bowl? What did we learn from really both sides of watching the Super Bowl? But before we get into that, take a second, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and we will keep you up to date on all your Ravens news. So, Jimmy, kind of set the stage a little bit about what we're going to be discussing in this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was interesting because you texted me about this, Glenn, and I had the same exact thought right after the Super Bowl was over. I was like, well, this season's over. We have a champion crowned. What is it that the Ravens can learn from these two teams and their paths to get here to help the Ravens be a better football team? Obviously, like the Rams were the victors, so we'll focus on the Rams. But it's also, I think, important to talk about the Bengals. The reason is because both of them got to Super Bowl. Both of them had a shot to win it. Both constructed very differently. However, have some clear similarities.
Mm-hmm.
And then adding to that, of course, doubling down, well, I'm sure he has a little bit of liquid courage in him. Sneed, the GM, Sneed, right, is the GM over at LA.
Les Sneed.
Les Sneed, there you go. Said today in the parade, F the picks. We'll use him to go win more Super Bowls, which honestly would probably make a guy like Eric DeCosta and Ozzie Newsome like crawl in their skin.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because it's just against what I believe to be every bit of their like football fiber, right? Like that's a big part of who they are. So I want to get into all that. Let's start with the Rams. I think that's a natural place to start and talk about like what immediately came to your mind when you said, what can the Ravens learn from this team?
Okay, and there's a lot, but I'll start with just the immediate thing that comes to my mind, and that's pass rush, Jimbo. I mean, they were harassing Joe Burrow, and I get it that the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line was the clear weak spot on their team, and it wasn't just the Rams that took advantage of that. They had issues protecting Joe Burrow throughout the entire playoffs. They were able to overcome that issue in all the previous matchups, but not this time. And they did it with two big stars. I mean, they did it with Aaron Donald and Von Miller, each getting two apiece, and then sprinkling in, some from the other surrounding cast. But 7 sacks. He was sacked 7 times, Jimbo, for a total of 43 yards.
Jeez.
And that wasn't even, and that wasn't even the worst, through this playoff run. I think he was sacked 9 times
against the Chiefs. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they still won the game. So that's the big thing, pass rush, but more importantly, pass rush without blitzing, right? I mean, every Ravens fan, who's been a fan over the last 3 years knows that the Ravens sent more blitzes than any team in the league, and yet they weren't consistently in the top when it comes to sacks. And I know there's other issues. I mean, other things you can look at like pressures and hits and all that stuff. But as far as I know, I mean, the best thing you can do is take the quarterback to the ground while he still has the ball in his hands, right? I mean, you want to sack the quarterback. Of course, I guess if you cause an errant throw and it creates a turnover, I guess that would be the best. But the goal of the pass rush is to get to the quarterback. And they did so in a big way, Jimbo, and none bigger than the final play that sealed the win, which was, of course, Aaron Donald. And if you look at that play, I'm sure people have seen, the replays going around. Jalen Ramsey was beaten once again by Jamar Chase and would have been gone for the game-winning touchdown. But Joe Burrow had no time because Aaron Donald was so quick in his face and bringing him to the ground that the opportunity wasn't there. So, Jimbo, pass rush is one thing I learned from the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I'm with you 1,000%. Pass rush is everything, right? Like I know that the Ravens have talked about investing in the back end, and obviously they have Jalen Ramsey, so it's not like they're not well invested back there. But the ability to get there, win one-on-one matchups, 1+1 matchups, right? Like the ability to get pressure without blitzing is huge. It'll be really interesting to see how McDonald does that because it's a copycat league, right? So you got to do it with personnel, but I mean, look, we're not going to draft a Aaron Donald. We're not going to draft a Leonard Floyd. Maybe, I don't know if we're not going to draft a Von Miller. Like, how many of those guys, they don't just grow on trees is my point. Not that we don't have the ability to draft them. They just don't grow on trees, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, you got to do a few things. Internally develop. Adafe always got to take the next step.
Yep.
You got to look at one thing we might have to do is stop with like the scrap heap free agent stuff. I don't know how much of that is making enough of an impact to move the needle. You know what I mean? Like, but at the end of the day, if you have nothing else left to do, well, then you got to do what you got to do, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But the other part of this to me is the strategy. It's not just the personnel, whether free agents, drafting, or on the team. It's the strategy and the mindset. So like the coaching and the strategy. So what is McDonald going to do different to dial up pressure with just the four guys? Like you saw in the second half when Von Miller, started doing the stunts inside, and it started causing havoc for those guys. In fact, I can't remember his name, but that right tackle was pretty upset. And I think he had a couple extracurricular, situations going on with Von Miller because he was getting beat. I mean, he was just getting beat. So yeah, pass rush is everything. I want to talk about another thing that I learned from this game. Well, specifically to the Rams, and that is the aggressiveness with which they played. Like, what I'm trying to say is Greg Roman is deceptive and he counts on deception, but sometimes, just like basketball, like, who's getting the ball. You pay your playmakers all this money to make the plays. Get it done. Like in that last drive, we knew Cooper Kupp was getting the ball. Right. So like at some point you've got to entrust your playmakers to just get it done. Not that we don't do that, but like, I want to see, and look, this will happen. Then I'll say he's force feeding people, but I want to see a bit more of that. Like finding creative ways to put our best playmakers in winning situations is, I guess, the way that I'll say it. I felt like the Rams did an excellent job of that throughout the entire season with Cooper Kupp, but even in the Super Bowl, when the lights were brightest.
Yeah, and it was more when Odell Beckham went out, it was even more attention was being paid to Cooper Kupp defensively, and yet they still found a way to force feed him the ball, even in the most obvious situations. And so that's kind of an interesting balance too, though, Jimbo, because you said it yourself. I mean, a lot of fans say that when Lamar's in there, he force feeds the ball too much to Hollywood and Andrews, and that there's not enough, spreading the ball around to create more deception for the defense. And I always say, I mean, if anyone's watched, I always say that there's that guy or a group of guys on every team around the league that the quarterback gives more targets to. I mean, it's obvious. Somebody has to get the lion's share of the target. You're not going to pull up a team and see everyone getting equal targets every game. It's just not how it is. You go around, the stars get the most targets because they've built the most trust in the coaching staff and in the quarterback that they'll get the job done when the ball's thrown their way or their number's called. So there is a balance, though, right? You can't just – because if he would have thrown an interception when he was trying to force the ball to Cooper Kupp into a double team –
we would have been saying the very opposite, right?
So it's a lot of it is results driven, and if you get it done, then you're a genius, and if you fail, then you're a village idiot, as they always say. So it's a lot of it is if you get it done, then great. If not,
but I guess this is what I'm referring to. Do you remember the 2-point conversions and the? Yeah, I'm gonna refer specifically to the 2-point conversions. We all knew where the ball was going, and that's fine. Just like in the red zone, they all knew the ball was going to Cooper Kupp. But how is it? I'm not a football guru, but how is it that Cooper Kupp ends up in a situation where it's just him and Eli Apple?
I know, right?
And like, give me that situation and put Mark Andrews in there all day. But like, I didn't see that scenario once in either of those plays where Mark was put in a scenario where it was like, hey, Mark, just beat the guy in front of you type situation. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of that obviously depends on the defense, like the defensive coordinator's trust in his guy and bracketing and help and all those things. But point being, they were able to get Cooper Kupp in a scenario with everything on the line where he was in a winning position. And I want us to be able to do that for guys like Mark and Marquise and Rashad and things like that as well.
Well, I mean, and I hear you, but didn't Cooper just go make a play? I mean, if you
No,
think about it,
absolutely. He
in
just
the
made a
2 point
play.
conversion, in that 2 point conversion against Pittsburgh, was Mark open?
Yeah.
The ball was overthrown because, TJ Watt came screaming in and forced Lamar to throw it higher, and they weren't able to connect. But so it's a lot of it's just, did your guy make the play? And Cooper did make the play. And if Eli got his hand in there and knocked the ball out, we might have a different conversation here. So a lot of it, did it work? But I see what you're saying.
Big if, Glenn. It's a big if.
It's a big if. Yeah, exactly. But I do see, yeah. I believe me, I was not upset to see Eli be the one who gave up that touchdown. I was not mad one bit. That dude's been running his mouth, and he had some comeuppance. And let me tell you, if you look around the league, there was a lot of players quite happy to see him as well. The Chiefs were definitely excited to see.
Yeah, Rashad Bateman days after. I mean, subsequently after the Super Bowl, multiple tweets, and he just had an apple.
Yep.
Just an apple.
Yeah, and then McCole Hardman was polishing his ring on camera, which was hilarious. But no, I mean, I think I think you're right. I think you find a way to get your stars open. You design plays that even if you are facing bracket coverage, you find a way to get your guy open because that's your guy. But the other thing that I noticed, and this is an overlap between both of these guys, both of these teams. Neither one necessarily like the Rams won the game. Their leading running back had 13 carries for 21 yards.
Yeah, they couldn't run a lick.
Couldn't run a lick, right? But yet they found a way to score, and the way they did that was big plays, down the field. They had the 35-yarder to Odell Beckham, the 22-yarder to Cooper Kupp, the 25-yarder to Henderson. They had multiple big-time chunk plays. And the same can be said on the other side with the Cincinnati Bengals. They had the 75-yard touchdown that was a horrible missed face mask call. They had the 46-yarder to Jamar Chase. They had big plays. And in the early part of the season, the Ravens were leading in that area. As far as yards per completion, the Ravens were number one at the halfway point when they were number one seed in the AFC. So they have it in them. But towards the end, when they hit that skid, the big plays disappeared, Jimbo. They absolutely vanished. And so you got to find a way to create big chunk plays. Look, we all know that Greg Roman, has this great system where he can create mismatches in the run game and he can get you with those 10, 12 play. And when it works, we love those 10, 12 play drives because it eats clock. It keeps our defense rested on the sideline, and it keeps their opposing offense on the sideline with them. But at some point, you have to you can't rely on 10, 12 play drives every time because one holding penalty, one negative run can derail a drive.
Yeah.
Or one miss, 10, 12 plays that all have to go right, where all 11 guys
10,
are doing things
for a mistake to be had.
Exactly. One tip pass, one ball goes off the hands of receiver. Anything can happen. So if you can sprinkle in those chunk plays, then you're not so reliant on having a constant, trudging down the field on 10, 12 play drives. I think we have to find a way to get more consistent with our big plays down the field.
I agree with you 100%. Now I'm going to play devil's advocate, kind of like, what you were mentioning a second ago, because of course Lamar went out and that's a huge difference.
Oh yeah.
And maybe they felt a bit limited based on Tyler Huntley's ability and experience, probably more than anything. Aside from that, I think if you think about how much more the big plays are going to be open when the run is even more of a threat, not just the quarterbacks running, but like JK and Gus are back there. I think that, the reason I mention that is because I think there's a lot of positivity. If you look at the first half of the season when we were leading the league in yards per reception at that point, right?
Yep.
And Lamar was healthy. And then you add JK and Gus to that equation. I mean, that's even without upgrading the offensive line, that already right there, Lamar healthy and those two guys back there, I think is going to make a big difference. So what I'm trying to say is that Greg might have given as much of a sample size while small to show that he can do it. That he's evolved enough as a play caller to get it done. But of course, health always factors in. So I agree with you 100%. We need big plays.
Yep.
Absolutely. However, I think one of the things that hurt the Bengals was their over-reliance on big plays, where that last drive, certainly there were some big plays for the Rams, but it wasn't a 4-play drive.
No.
You know what I mean? So it's much more methodical. And so the ability for us to be ambidextrous in that way and do both, I think that's what can make us incredibly dangerous as a team. But 100%, we have to get better at it. And that starts with the coaching staff, goes to Lamar, goes to the wide receivers. I mean, that's, top down, everyone. But I want to talk to you about this, Glenn, not necessarily, and we can go back to this, but not necessarily execution on the field. I mentioned this before. Fundamentally, the way the Rams built this team is the exact opposite of Ozzie and Eric and the entire staff, the way that they see it happening. How do you feel now that they won a Super Bowl about the way that they did that in comparison to the way the Ravens traditionally go about building their team?
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. This is like two opposite ends of the spectrum, right? I mean, one team that certainly recognized an opportunity to go all in in an opportunity to try and win a Super Bowl. Now, that only pays off. It only works if you win. Even if you get there, if you lose, egg on your face, because now you're trying to get out of cap hell and you got a bunch of aging guys that are costing a whole bunch of money, weighing down your cap, and you have no draft picks to bring in the injection of youth and cheap talent to help, supplement the roster. So it only works if you win. But they did win, Jimbo. They did win, which proves at least that it worked once, right? It at least has worked in this scenario. So once you see it work, it's just like you mentioned earlier, it's a copycat league. So I don't think that this is going to be the only team that starts employing this strategy where they don't necessarily value the draft as heavily as getting known commodities to come to their place. Guys that have done it in this league before, and maybe for whatever reason they're unhappy in their current situation, or maybe the surroundings going on there are just not conducive to allow them to grow and to use their talents to the best of their ability. Whatever the case is, they find those guys and they bring them to their team. Von Miller was a guy that some people said, he was nosediving. He was at the back nine, and he may be on the back nine of his career. But I mean, goodness gracious,
still made that huge play. I mean, a number of them.
Yeah, he had like 9 sacks in his last 8 games as a Ram. So the guy was big every single big game. Every game down the stretch, he had at least 1 sack. So that's just, and then Odell Beckham. I mean, talk about what an ad that was. They lose Robert Woods, I think, a day or two after they bring in Odell Beckham. And without Odell Beckham, they might not even be in the playoffs, much less go on and win a Super Bowl without Odell. And then they go out and get Eric Weddle out of retirement to be the green dot and run things on the defensive side. So they go out and get known commodities and stick them in on their team, and they find a way to make it work. And the Ravens go the exact opposite. They say, we'll get some free agents, but not any of the high priced ones, and we'll make some trades, but we're going to do it with guys where we only have to give up a 4th or 5th. They don't step out there too much like a Matt Stafford, give out multiple first-round picks. So it's two different ways of looking at it. Now, both ways seem to work, Jimbo, so I'm like torn. But what I would say is –
go ahead.
I would say is if I was the Ravens, use a bit of both. Use your strategy of continuing to supplement the roster through the draft. But if there's a guy – whether it's a free agent, a trade opportunity, or a draft pick that is like in the top 5, and you have to go get – if you identify a guy that you think gets you over the hump on either side of the ball, I want to see more aggressiveness to go get that guy. I don't care what the avenue is. Go be aggressive and get a guy that you think is a difference maker on either side of the ball, because they did so with Von, they did so with Odell Beckham, and they did so with Eric Weddle. And it paid off. I don't think if you take any one of those 3 guys out of the equation, I don't think they win. I mean, they needed every bit of those guys and their talent. So what I think you should learn is to be more aggressive if you're the Ravens.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up aggressiveness because, synonymous to that, I would say the Ravens need to, however it manifests itself, like however it looks, I'm not as worried about, but going all in is important. You and I talked about this last time where like everyone can buy a house as an investment, but at the end of the day, you got to live in the house. So you better like the house, right? So sometimes it's not always about the value in a player, like financially, right? Or dollar per sack, dollar per tackle, dollar per catch, whatever. But it's about the guy completing the team, the guy being the playmaker in that one big moment, right? Like, so some things can't be quantified as clearly, but going all in is everything, right? So if being aggressive, Glenn, comes down to being more aggressive in the draft, that's fine too. I think we would both agree with that. Like if the Ravens are more comfortable with that, that's okay. But I think a perfect example of going all in, and I know that you got a bit of, not a ton, but a little bit of heat, not heat, but people disagree with you. I know I certainly did. When you initially said, no, you keep Big O, and you say, you're playing right tackle because we got a chance to go win a chip, win a chip here. So why don't you calm yourself, play the position, and you go hit the market afterward, right? But we're going all in. What the Ravens would have missed out on is an opportunity to pick up picks and things like that. Now, hindsight is 2020. However, things would have looked a lot different if he were at left tackle all season. That is for sure. Every single person that dons the black and purple was complaining about Alejandro Villanueva. Every single person.
Every fan,
Right. So if we had Big O over there, things could have looked a lot down. Not obviously Lamar went down, our running backs went down, all those things happened, but we didn't know that was going to happen.
Right.
So
maybe Lamar doesn't go down if Big O's over there.
Exactly. So however it has to look, I agree with you 100%. Being aggressive and going all in, I think is important. Like you have to go all in every year. Like there's no more like, oh, we're building for the future. There's no guarantee, right? Like
it's COVID showed us that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you 100%.
I mean, I don't think you totally I don't know if I want them to go to the extent of the Rams. Now they won, so it's hard to say that, but I think that I want them to be more aggressive. Like if you feel they're this close, they got 9 picks in the first 4 rounds, Jimbo. I better not see them make all 9. I want to see them package and go up and get a stud, hopefully at pass rush, or at this next position, because this is the last thing that I noticed. It was a big one. You got to build an absolute wall in front of your stud quarterback. Let's be honest. Joe Burrow right now, he's a stud. He's a guy that Cincinnati needs to take care of. And is it unreasonable to think that Joe Burrow, if they don't build that wall in front of him, could be the next Andrew Luck? I mean, he could be the guy.
No, absolutely not. It is not unreasonable.
And the Colts, they decided to build that line right after Andrew Luck decided he wasn't going to play anymore. So if they would have just built that line a little sooner, they might still have Andrew Luck.
And the crazy thing is that Andrew Luck is built like a truck.
Exactly. And the dude was physical. Like he was not no punk who's scared of contact. No.
And Joe Burrow, while he's a baller, you're absolutely right, does not have quite the same physical stature as one Andrew Luck. So you would think that it would take even less to inflict permanent damage on him, right?
Right. And the guy's already had a season-ending injury in his short career. And look, I'm not saying this is a knock against Burrow. I think he's a tough guy. I think he's a hell of a player, and I think he has hopefully a long career ahead of him. But here's what I will say. He got sacked 7 times, Jimbo. If you take away, and that was just the sacks, they were harassing him all game, giving him very little opportunity to throw. And even when he did get the ball out,
that third quarter was brutal.
I mean, he was getting hit all the time. And so even in scenarios where he gets the ball off, you can't tell me it's not affecting the throw when he's got a guy in his face, or even if there's not a guy, you start to see ghosts. You start to feel pressure when it's not even there because you're so used to getting hit. So I think we all agree, and everyone on TV agreed that was a penalty when T. Higgins face masked with Jalen Ramsey and had a 75-yard touchdown. So if you take that away, Jimbo, a clear penalty that should have been called, if you take that play away, Joe Burrow was 21 of 32 for 188 yards, no touchdowns, no picks in the biggest game. Joe Burrow is better than 21 of 32 for 188 yards. His weapons around him are far better than their quarterback going 21 of 32 for 188 yards. Their tight end, their running back, everyone around them is so much better than what that number is. The only problem is they have a horrible offensive line. So, and even with that 75-yard touchdown, Jimbo, his QBR in that game was 39. 39. Matt Stafford threw 2 picks. His QBR was 60.
And it's crazy because it really shows the impact of the 2 things you talked about. Obviously, the need for the offensive line, but also the impact of a pass rush. Like you can see, and we need both of those, right?
Need both of those. So
badly.
So my whole thing is, if you've learned nothing from this game, it is like you just said, pass rush and protect your passer. If you don't take anything else out of this, Because look, is there any doubt that we can run our corners out there and be just as good and if not better than every single team in the league? Like, they have that pass rush, but they have a great secondary. We already have the secondary because Peters will be back. Marlon will be back. All we need to do is get that pass rush to catch up because we got the back end. So that's the other thing I learned is you got to build a wall in front of your franchise quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with all those points. Let us know what your guys' thoughts are in regards to what you learned from the Rams, of course, the victors, but also the Bengals, and just getting to the Super Bowl, what the Ravens can apply to improve as a football team. Let us know all your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll talk to you guys soon.